Let's take a close look at one of our top stories this morning. The housing market in British Columbia and Vancouver in particular has been a hot one for a long time. We've been talking about that for years on this program. Well, we got two jaw-dropping reports yesterday from the provincial government that tell us just how much money laundering contributes to the high prices. Here is the figure. 5% money laundering increases the cost of housing an additional 5%. And here's the overall big money. More than $5 billion in dirty money went into the real estate market last year alone, and that was 3/4 of all of the money laundering activity in the province. So we wanted to look at this in more detail. And joining me this morning is Peter German, who is the former Deputy RCMP Commissioner, the man behind the report with the nickname Dirty Money 2. We saw him in Tanya Fletcher's report earlier, but I'm happy to welcome him for some time myself. Mr. German, good to have you on the program.
Good morning, Heather. It's a pleasure.
Can you give me a quick explainer, first of all? How do people launder money through real estate?
Right. Well, laundering through real estate is a little bit different than what we've been hearing about with casinos and luxury cars and that sort of thing. In those, it's a cash-intensive business, and as we've heard, people have walked in to car dealers and they've walked into casinos with bags of money. You don't see that with real estate. With real estate, it's a little bit more sophisticated. We're not in what we call the placement stage of money laundering, where you're trying to get cash into the system. The cash is already in the system and it's being wired around the world or within the country. And so really it's part of what we call the layering stage, where people are trying to obfuscate the paper trail. So you could have money coming in from an overseas location, and it just comes in by way of an electronic funds transfer, arrives at a bank in a lawyer's trust account in Vancouver, and that is your closing funds for the real estate deal.
And nobody really knows who's behind the money or where.
That's right.
And then this problem has reached what I call jaw-dropping. I know what my reaction was, but as you were digging into this, as you were doing this report and found out that we're talking more than $5 billion just from 1 year in dirty money, what was your reaction?
Well, there are really two reports, as you mentioned in your intro, and the quantum figures that you were referring to come from Professor Maloney's expert panel. So they were looking at just how much are we talking about, and they were also looking at regulatory reform. I was asked to do a follow-up to my casino report and look at organized crime in real estate, in luxury cars, in horse racing. So the two reports are actually parallel,
right,
but they come essentially to the same conclusions. And yes, to answer your question, it is shocking. I don't think I'm surprised too much by anything anymore, but they're certainly shocking numbers. And that I just should say, Heather, that the 5% that Professor Maloney's team came up with is when you average it around the province, but certainly there are different geographic locations within the Lower Mainland and elsewhere where it is probably much higher than 5%.
So within the Vancouver market, probably a whole lot more than that 5. That's the provincial average. What has happened?
Right.
Where are the failures in the system that has allowed this to escalate to this level?
Right. So you can't point a finger at any one particular area. There are responsibilities here, both the federal government and the provincial government. And as the Attorney General and Minister of Finance here mentioned yesterday, they really have to work closely with their federal counterparts, which they have already been doing, to look at a number of things. But certainly in terms of real estate, transparency of ownership is a big one. Who owns the property? We have so many nominee owners. We have 71,000 residential owners that have service addresses at post office boxes. We have people who own residential real estate in high-risk jurisdictions, in countries that we have trade sanctions against. So it's about transparency, beneficial ownership, who really owns the property. And then you're also looking at beneficial ownership of corporations, because so many residences as well as commercial properties are owned by numbered companies. And on top of all of that, we need better data. We've got a very modern, computerized system, excellent people working in this land title world and the assessment world, but the data they're working with tends to be from the horse and buggy era, so it's very hard to manipulate it.
Okay. in light of that, I mean, we did hear the minister yesterday talking about how BC has put in legislation, first of its kind in the country, that when it's
That's
up
right.
and going, that it is going to do just what you called for. You're going to be able to find out that who the person who really owns the asset, that person's going to be named. So it should be much more transparent. But that's just BC. What else as a country do we need to do?
Well, on the national level, we've pointed to issues with our financial intelligence unit. We have FinTrack, which collects all the suspicious transaction reports, large cash transaction reports from banks and casinos and various reporting entities. And again, good people, good software, great data bank full of tons of intelligence reports. The problem is it's very difficult for police to access it because police are not part of FinTrack. So FinTrack tries to figure out what do the police require, and the police try to figure out what FinTrack has. And on top of that, some segments of the economy, some industries don't have to report to FinTrack and some do. So the auto sector, for example, does not report to FinTrack. So we have no visibility on, for example, in that case, cash sales. When you talk about real estate, realtors are supposed to report, but they haven't been reporting in the numbers that they should have. So you've got a whole lot of issues in terms of who reports and how effectively it's being handled.
Well, with your work and the two reports, a clarion call to action here for the country, because obviously if it drives up the prices to that degree, it hurts Canadians, and we need to care about this. Mr. German, I really appreciate all of that time today. Thank you, sir.
You're most welcome, Heather.